Hello and welcome to this tutorial. What may be probably my only tutorial, depending on how things go, but I might follow up with more in the future. So in this tutorial, we're going to look at how to create blend spaces for mostly walking animations and learn how to blend that with, in the context of a third-person shooter, other animations of holding different weapons. Now this is useful because then we don't have to create walking animations for each weapon that we want to put into our game. We can just layer the top half of a character's body with the bottom half containing the walking animations and the top half containing whatever other animation you want the character to do. Now we're going to be using my current project as an example. This is a game that we're working on for a major project, and we have a couple characters we can choose from. Now you can do this with any character using any animation set, especially the default Unreal animations and characters that are included with the engine, also available in the Epic Marketplace. But we're going to pull up Deshaun here. He's a groovy cap. First things first, let's just get rid of this weapon in his hand, just to make this tutorial much easier. Okay, so we have Deshaun imported. We have a skeleton and everything. And we have different sets of animations. So let's look through these animations. So we can go, we have our animation repository here. So we have a bunch. We're gonna want to look at mostly the MP5 animations, bat animations, Winchester animations, and if I can find it correctly, here we go. Oh, no. Oh, sorry, right here. So these animations were created for a rifle in mind, but obviously since we're going to be splicing the bottom half of the body, we can reuse this for whatever we want to. But first things first, we're going to create a blend space for this animation. Now, why blend spaces are important is because it allows us to network different animations together using float parameters in a much easier way than networking them together using transitions in an animation network. Because traditionally, going from one animation to the next, you need a bunch of booleans and passing from state to state in an animation state machine, and doing that for walking left, right, front and back is a lot of work. Thankfully, in modern game engines, we can just blend them together and use one or two numbers to, or just one number in this case, to simply transition between them and behave as a singular animation. So we're going to do that first. Let me just check the screen here. Yeah, we're all good. So we have idle, we have jog backwards, jog forwards, jog left, and jog right. Okay. So what we are going to do is, let me just click on one of them. Or actually, let's go to animation, create blend space. There we go. Now, the skeleton for our character here is universal scale. Obviously, you'd be selecting the skeleton for whichever model you're using in your project. And there we go. This is our blend space. So we're going to name this tutorial BSP blend space. not to be mistaken with geometry BSPs. That's a whole other thing. So let's go into this. Let's expand the windows a bit so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so what you see here is just the default pose in our character and a graph. So what we're going to want to do first is establish what these axes are going to be. In this case, this is a walking animation, so our character is going to walk forwards, backwards, left and right, and also stand still. So what we're going to need is, for the y-axis, it's going to be speed, the speed the character is walking. So let's go over here. Let's make sure you can see that. Yeah, perfect. So on the vertical axis, let's go from 0 to, let's say, 600. There we go. And for organization's sake, we can name the axes. So let's name it speed. So you can go from 0 to 600. For the horizontal axes, generally, since we're going to be dividing this in the directions of the player's movement, we're going to be thinking about it using angles. And we're going to calculate in the animation blueprint the sort of relative angle the player is walking relative to his actual base rotation, which is facing forward. So obviously moving right would be 90 degrees to the direction we're actually facing. Backwards is 180 degrees. Left is -90. And you know, if you're going as -180 is backwards as well. So that gives us the lowest and our highest angle of being -180 to +180, which will be the bounds of our bottom axis. I hope I'm explaining this right, or at least in a way that can be understood by whoever's watching this. So we're going to enter this over here, and we're going to name this axis direction. So we have our axes set up all good. So now it's just a matter of actually placing the animations where we want it to be. So over here, let's start at speed 0, angle 0. Is you're facing forward, you're not moving. We're going to put in our idle animation. For this case, I'm going to use this one, idle rifle hip, which is just the player holding a rifle and standing still and sort of having a bit of just idle breathing, simple stuff. And as we speed up, we want the player to actually run forward. So speed 600, angle 0. So running straight forward where we're facing, we're going to have just a jog animation like that. And for speed 600, angle 90, we're going to want the player to run to the right, like so. Speed 600, angle 180, we're going to have the player walk backwards. Now, the reason why we don't have a negative speed for walking backwards is that Unreal uses velocity rather than just quote-unquote speed, which is an arbitrary measurement. Velocity is the actual speed regardless of direction. So that's why we use the angle of 180 degrees to actually tell the animation blueprint that the player is walking backwards. And for -90, walk to the left. Oops. This is a bit goofy, but it works. And negative 180, we're gonna have walk backwards. And before we move on, we have to fill in the rest of these with our idle rifle animation, just for the sake of consistency. Okay, so for the next part, we're going to actually create an animation blueprint and look at how to blend animations at different parts of the body at the same time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to characters. We're going to go back to, in my case, Deshaun. I'm going to right click him and create, there we go, up here, create anim blueprint. So we're going to name this tutorial ABP, animation blueprint. And we're going to go in here. So this is our anim graph. What we're gonna do from here, actually, first things first, we're going to add a bunch of variables in here and change it to a float. We're gonna name this one speed, and we're gonna name this one direction. The value range for direction is going to be minus 180, positive 180. You don't actually have to set a value range, because if you go over or below when feeding information to the blend space that we created earlier, it's not going to do anything. You can go over or below, it'll just do what it's supposed to do. And in reality, when the player is moving around, it'll never read a value more or higher or lower than 180 or negative 180. But just to be safe, just for the sake of being correct, we're going to set that value. And speed, same, 0 to 600. We can do the same for the slider range as well, because the slider just means we can play around with it in the editor, as I will show you in a bit. We're going to compile, go to animation preview editor. So we have these values we can actually play around with. Pretty cool. So what we're going to do is, let's add a state machine. And let's just call this locomotion. Whatevs. So right now we're just going to create a state, and we're going to name it, because here's the thing, the reason we created a blend space is that way we don't have to create a state for each movement the character is doing. So we can pretty much do everything we need to do in a singular state and just drive it using different values to do what we want. So let's just call this base state for now. I mean, assuming that you know how animation graphs work, you can expand this to do whatever you want. You can use whatever states you want. I just want to show you how to blend the animations together. Okay, so inside the state, what we're gonna do first, I'll show you how to set up the actual blend space, and then I'll show you how to blend a top half of the body onto another animation. So first things first, it's actually just as simple as dragging in, here's our blend space tutorial BSP, chucking that in there, and remember those variables we created, speed, get, direction, get, plugging those into their respective slots, compiling, and it should just work. If you go to the anim preview editor, we have those values that we can play with. If you drive that forward, so speed up to 600, it starts moving. And if we change the direction, he starts moving in different directions, all in the singular animation state, which is pretty cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start actually blending with other animations. This is the good part. Let's compile, stop moving. So I have a animation, or more so just a pose of this guy holding a shotgun, a Winchester. So I have that in here. You can use this with whatever other animation you have for your character. So Winchester idle. Right here. So we're going to do a layered blend per bone. We're going to have this as the base pose, our walking rifle animation, and this as the blend pose, because we want to blend this on top of that. We plug this into the final animation pose. Now, what we do here is we need to set up where it actually blends from. Now, every mesh has a skeleton, obviously, and it's layered in a hierarchy, starting from the root down, 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 and so on. So generally what you would do is you'd select a bone to blend from. So if we had an animation and told the layered blend per bone node to blend from spine 3, it'll take that animation for all the bones under spine 3 and the bones above spine or next to spine 3 will remain in the base animation, which is the base pose of our walking animation. So for this example, we're going to use spine 3, and it works best with our skeleton as it's just in the perfect location to blend above the body. So we're going to add a filter here, a bone name, spine 3. You need to make sure that you type it exactly correct. Names are case sensitive in Unreal, especially for skeletons. And for blend depth, we're going to hit 3. This is basically how much do you want to blend with the base animation. 3 is a good balance. 0 is a hard sort of cut the body in half, just animate the top half as it's supposed to be. The higher the number is, it sort of just tries to mesh the two animations in together, sort of bleeding them in to create a more natural movement. It doesn't work with every animation. It's better said than done, which is generally why you'd want to animate these different components to work with each other anyway. You wouldn't want to be taking some bizarre animation from a different project and trying to blend it with something you created for a different character. It would just create a mess. So we have this set up. We set up our bone spine 3. So everything spine 3 and below is going to use our Winchester idle anim. Everything above is going to use our base pose, which is the walking animation we set up earlier. Compile, and there you go. Well, he's just standing right now, but if we're speed up, add a direction, is working perfectly fine. But what if we want to add different weapons in and sort of switch through them dynamically? Unreal gives us a very, very nice node that we can use just before this one, called blend poses by integer. So this gives us different blend poses, and it says blend poses, but you can use this to just switch through entire animations without blending them. It's a really useful tool, but in this case, we're using this for blending. So we put this into our blend pose in the layered blend instead of the actual animation, and we plug the Winchester animation into blend pose 0. And let's find another weapon animation. I have bat, literally holding a bat, into blend pose 1. And it decides which animation to pass through to the blend and the final pose using the given integer. 0 gives us 0. If we switch this to 1, not 10, it should play 1, which is the bat. So if we hit compile, nothing happens. That's because I didn't plug this in. If we hit compile, there you go. So what we're going to want to do is, instead of hard coding this, we set up another variable of an integer, this weapon, and plug that into our active child index. So what this lets us do, if I stop doing that, I should stop doing that, is I can switch between the two weapons I set up like that. And I can drive this variable using whatever code I have set up in my game that dictates what weapon I have selected. I can give each weapon a sort of ID, a number ID, and that number gets fed into the animation blueprint, telling it which pose it should be playing. So let me just stop this. We can add more blend poses to this by right-clicking and add blend pin, and we can do this as many times as we want. So you can add as many different poses as you want. We're not limited to just 2 as it originally seems. So let's see what other animations we have. We have an MP5. I think I have a pistol in here somewhere. There we go. So we have 4. That's a decent amount. I think I can delete this pin. And if we switch through those, oops, play. Let me zoom in. Number 2, number 3, which is technically our 4th weapon. Beautiful. Well, there you have it. That is how you blend animations together and set up blend spaces in Unreal Engine 4. I hope this was helpful. Have a good day.